All right, I'm live. Um, I'm gonna try to not be such a spaz in this live stream and talk more slowly. I was part of this I've learned is part of my Myers-Briggs type, which I think is an ENFP, but I don't know. I'm second guessing that because of some things. But Dolly, what up, girl? Because when I was talking to you yesterday, actually, I was feeling like you're all over the place. Like Dolly has such a I think Nate commented on it, I'm assuming it's Nate, but he said something like Dolly has such an utter sense of just like calm and peace about her that um is in contrast to my hopefully seemingly peaceful but also a little chaotic. um so Andrew says here, love this topic. The NPC thing is phenomenal. Again, this is like my titles are always a little bit like I was saying to Dolly yesterday, trying to explain um, mosaic vision, but and it's like when I was talking about the chair, is that in Peugeot's video, which I should find somewhere, where he talks about everything, all vision um, is a step of faith. Anytime you see anything, that's really the way that I conceive of it, is anytime you see anything, you're seeing a unity, at least in your focal attention, you're seeing a unity of multiplicities or of particulars or of parts. I don't like the idea of parts though, because that's like more of a machine thing. You're seeing a body of many members. That's maybe the most biblical way to say it. Um, which is the body question is it's connected to all these things. And so anytime you see anything, you're seeing the body of the many members. So to see a chair is to see the cup, you have the handle, you have this part of it, I mean the cup is not that complicated. The inside, the outside. Um so my boy here, I didn't get to put this in the edit, but this is my buddy Charlie. This is Tory Pilgrim. He's tired because he's in Australia right now. But he just put out this video that I wanna did I copy it? I think I copied it. And I wanna put in the can people still see me? I don't know. I'm trying to figure out how to do this streaming thing because when I he just did this video called The Trinity of the Self, which is phenomenal and it's really related. The cup is more complicated than you know. Agreed, Gavin. Yes. I mean, it is for sure. I'm just saying, like, me trying to name the members of the body of the cup is, I'm just limited in my ability to articulate that, but I agree with you. So this is Charlie's video. I think I can post it in here of the Trinity of the Self, and it's really good. Charlie's like a brilliant, intuitive mind, and it's fantastic. I made some comments on it. I'd love to put it in the show notes. Maybe I can get Nate to do that, or I can figure out how to do that myself. But it's related to all these things that I've been thinking about. And all right, let me try to circle back to NPCs, groupthink, settle bodies, all that stuff. Fear, damn, how to dive into this seeming morass. This is like reminds me a little bit of C.S. Lewis's in his book Paralandra, the second of the Ransom trilogy. There's a section in it toward the end where it's called, what is the name of it? There's a Peter, no, what's the guy's name? There's a Catholic, Peter Kreeft has a video. It's on YouTube. I should put that in here too. About when I navigate away from the page, the cosmic, yeah, what is it? The Cosmic Dance, a lecture by Peter Kreeft. That's what it is. It's so good, but it's about this end section of Paralandra. Um, and uh, and it's about I mean, man, It's hard see, like, again, this is hard to summarize, but he does it brilliantly in this C.S. Lewis does it brilliantly, and then Peter Kreeft talks about it brilliantly, but it's about this insection and paralandra. So, essentially, it's about the divination of man and, or the divination of a person, let's say it that way, because it's not really man, I guess. I don't wanna give away too much of the story because it's set in Venus, so it's not man would be is it man? Wow, I'm confusing myself. It could be, I guess. What is man? Um, would it only have to be terrestrial? Um, you know, is it only persons from the silent planet? Um, anyhow, I don't know. I'd have to think about how that fits in the Ransom trilogy, but it's about the divination of them, and there's this. Essentially, it's like this. It almost reminds me of like a psychedelic trip. And it's this idea of this cosmic dance, and it almost looks like this interwoven tapestry of things, but there are angels there, and so like if you think about the biblical descriptions of angels, and is it the seraphim and the cherubim, many eyes, soaring upon their wings, pinions, singing the triumphant hymn? We talk about this in the divine liturgy of Orthodoxy, shouting, proclaiming, and saying. And it's essentially holy, 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 Lord of Sabaoth, the Lord of glory, the Lord of Sabbath, and it's like an angel. The description of angel, it's like spinning wheels. Where is that in? Um, this is where I need Jason and my hardcore biblicists to bring me all these biblical references. But like seeing an angel, which reminds me also of Rupert Sheldrake and his book The Physics of Angels, and which goes through all this angelology throughout history and people that wrote on angels. If you are like seeing the very big picture is almost like an LSD trip or being on mushrooms or something. You've got some um I hope so, Dolly. Awesome imagery appearing in my head right now. When you really can zoom out to see the huge tapestry of the thing behind the thing behind the thing, and you see the relationships and the interrelatedness of everything, and you um, like it's almost too much for me. It's like Isaiah being touched with the coal, with the tongs and the coals, and he's just like, or the disciples, away from me, for I am an unclean man, to really be approached with holiness and to see. This is why no one can see God and live, when we're talking about Moses, and God protected him by putting him in the cleft of the rock. But then arguably Jess, my boy, I was talking with Jeff. Thank you, Wayne. Ezekiel Wheels. Appreciate it. Appreciate the love. God, Wayne, you're such a great human being. Feel free to pop on if you want. I would love to talk to you. But I need to put a link, probably, don't I? I suck at this. It's okay. So here we go. So I just said I suck at this. Let's take a shift away from angels for a second and go into a little bit of POS. And something I want to talk about was the Hagia Sophia by Thomas Merton. And I want to read this section of it. Can you, when I navigate away, because this is about this, this is about loving yourself, which is also tied to a section of Charlie's video on. Did I still not put the link in here? God, okay, you gotta love yourself. Um, so Charlie was saying he was basically saying the Trinity is like it's what Dolly and I were talking about in the stream yesterday of judgment, the difference of judgment, discernment, and then humility, and that had a little bit to do with like the I'm distracting myself. I'm trying to do too many things at once with the Trinity in itself, because he was saying in his video he said like I made a comment to write it down. The judgment has to do with the ideal. But the judgment is automatically abstract. It's like it's a, it's how do you say it? This is where I can't ever repeat these things. Um, Here we go. Let's just see what your comment says. I'll leave my thoughts here before they vanish. A friend asked me to define person. I stopped at saying something you can have a relationship depending on the body and the spirit of yourself. And Gavin's here. Okay, I'm gonna try to, Gavin, you can regulate me. This is like Sam's title in his thing the other day. He's just like Luke's emotional regulation system. I'm flipping two all over the place.
I think Grimgris called that an attention sphincter.
Yeah. Well, part of that is like I am a little bit so right-brained that like it's hard to which is kind of chaos in a sense, that it's almost hard to like bring it down into specificity, or I'm seeing so many different things at once that like it's like a swirl of chaos. Charlie, get in here and tell me what you were saying about discernment. And you're
Yeah.
clearly in the dark on the other side of the world.
Yeah. All right. Pause that. So it was basically like I was trying to create Vivekisms about the Trinity. It's like things that essentially you can just as far removed from culture as possible and as close to a concept that you can kind of translate. The Trinity essentially is there's the immutable, perfect, out of time concept. It's like mathematics. And then the Son is the instantiation, sort of the thing in and of its moment. Like if you think about it in the way of the cup is the individual, the Son is the individual cup that you have. And then there's the Holy Spirit, which was harder to define, as I say in the video, but it is the thing that calls out. And so that is like, to me, it's like the spirit of, if you see someone dance, you can tell them apart through how they move. It's in their spirit. It's in the spirit of the movement that individuality calls out. Or if you to go back to the cup, it's you're using your hands as a cup, or you're using a lid of I don't know, peanut butter jar as a cup or something like that. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it totally makes sense to me, and, like, what it made me think of was, deep calls to deep, which, like, I sent you a little Vox message earlier
Mm,
because that's the calling idea of it, and I was telling you, like, ever since I was a child, I was raised in more of a, Protestant kind of biblicist context, and so there was just a lot of Bible
mm,
memorization, a lot of Bible stories, a lot of reading of Proverbs and Psalms, a lot of children's Bibles, just Bible, Bible, Bible all the time. And that's a great thing. Like I love that. It's a super strength of that culture. But deep calls to deep was always like, the shiny glimmering thing. It was always one of those just like little lines in the Bible where I was just like, oh, that thing is whatever that is is all of it and really good and really
mm,
important, that little thing has just always stuck with me. But that to me is what that is. There's this it's part of the dance, it's part of the cosmic dance, it's part of what it means to be a person, but it's part of incarnation. Like I've been talking to some friends recently about how Jesus said all the time in the gospels, I don't do anything on my authority, I do it on the Father's authority, and I don't use my words, I'm not even concerned with my words, it's just the Father's words. I
mm.
hear and I do. And
Yeah, I was saying that is like the instantiation of like the instantiation is like it's never always perfect. I mean, I suppose in the case of Jesus, it kind of was, but that's the relationship between the instantiation and the ideal. It's
yeah,
like if you have a
but there's
perfect plan, you don't need to individualize it. You'd be like, ah, I'm just following the plan.
right, and there's some way there that in that perfect relationship of that call and response, think of it,
Mm-hmm.
that there's a freedom, there's a being, there's a real choice, there's a true willing in that dance with the the female. There is a lead, but there's a feminine response to that is
Yeah.
real and legitimate. And the NPC would almost be like the response, the feminine response is not free. Like there is no will there. It's a complete colonization. It's like it's like I don't know.
So all
Something
this,
signifying.
Huh?
all these words that are in the title here, you're trying to you're talking about all of them at once.
Well, generally, yeah, that's kind of my broad mosaic vision thing. This is like my title. Everything that I came up in there are all the members of the body of the chair. And this conversation is about the chair. So
because I'm hearing Charlie, I'm listening to Charlie and I'm thinking, what's he talking about? And it's like, okay, divine person, perfect love. And I'm thinking, well, maybe subtle bodies. And then, okay, there's some, I can see groupthink and NPCs in there as well.
now we're talking.
And then maybe divided man, there's this, this is where you can have some opponent processing. You got to be able, if you, sometimes, you need two hands to be able to do something.
I'll drop in the sort of the Trinity of Self that Luke was referring to that's in the video, and that will make a little bit more sense, because the idea was like using the sort of Trinity sort of rubric that I explained with the ideal, the instantiation, and the thing that calls out. I was sort of like called to understand it in a personal orientation when Dali was saying, oh, there's discernment and then there's judgment. Oh, there's a third thing. What's that third thing? And to me, this is like with what an individual has towards the world is they have judgment and discernment, and then they have humility. And that's the Trinity of the self. Judgment is this imposed ideal of like how we all expect the world will sort of be, and it's
law.
Like
would you say it's law?
Yeah, law is a really good way to put it. It's like there's an unchangingness to it. There's an immortality to it. The sun is discernment. Discernment, in my opinion, always has like action always tied into it. If you're discerning, you're sort of trying to peer past things in yourself. Yeah. And to me, that's like, you could almost put it into habit, like, especially if you're thinking about it in an NPC way. Like the instantiation of the law in the sun is, you can correctly and incorrectly do it by trying to habitualize it, trying to, listen to this guy, talk to this person, respond to these comments in this way, and things like that. And that's why the sort of the glue that holds the two together or looses them apart from each other is humility and humility or pride. And like humility is, as I defined it, is sort of a sincere relationship with yourself. Like it's accepting yourself for the limitation that you can have, but not in a sense that is essentially trying to truly value it. And if you have too much, if you have an overextension of yourself, then your discernment is skewed. And if you have too much, and if you have, and your judgment is skewed. And it can go the other way. If you don't treat your humility as something sincere, and you just try to go, oh, I'm worthless, I have nothing. If you don't actually try to mediate it and have a relationship with it, then everything gets skewed again. Like there's something in the Trinity that impacts each other and sort of shifts between the two.
Right. I
hope that helps.
Can I read something that, I mean, I've mentioned this before, but what you just said really reminded me of this Hagia Sophia thing. And so I want to read just the first stanza of it, because it's really related to your video, I think, and what you just said, and then see what you guys say. So at the beginning of this poem, Hagia Sophia by
I'll have to cut out. I'm on 1% and it's 1 o'clock in the morning. So
all right. See you, Charlie. Look forward to your responses and comments, and thanks for
Yes, 100%. Thanks, guys. Bye.
Okay, see you, brother. So the Hagia Sophia says, there is in all things, in all visible things, an invisible fecundity, a dimmed light, a meek namelessness, a hidden wholeness. This mysterious unity and integrity is wisdom, the mother of all natura naturans. There is in all things an inexhaustible sweetness and purity, a silence that is a fount of action and joy. It rises up in wordless gentleness, and flows out to me from the unseen roots of all created being, welcoming me tenderly, saluting me with indescribable humility. This is at once my own being, my own nature, and the gift of my Creator's thought and art within me, speaking as Hagia Sophia, speaking as my sister wisdom. Um, it's the idea of there's a lot in there. I mean, it's talking about humility. It's talking about hidden wholeness. Because that's a big thing. It's making peace with. Charlie said something in his video. Making peace with. This is a big thing for me, very existentially. Um, Making peace with what is not complete and right in me, like a little bit of my own becoming, I guess.
Something that arose in me is the importance of counsel, because
Mm,
um, we have blind spots, right? Especially if we have like the right amount of humility. Like we have our own experiences and blind spots, and it's just so helpful to be able to have relationships with others so that they can see the things that we can't see. Um,
yeah,
that's so yeah. There was a part of me that's understanding this. There's something you can do as an individual. That's what was coming to me with this idea of whether you're judging or discerning, condemning or discerning, and then trying to, like when Dolly mentioned that yesterday, I was thinking about the importance of triangulation and geometry. And whenever you're trying to hit a target, my mind goes there. So I like the idea of trying to be able to, something that allows you to figure out, if you're calibrated correctly, aiming correctly. But you can do that as an individual. But then I think there's another piece where even as an individual, trying to do discernment, and it's trying to do that right, trying to avoid sinning, trying to live correctly. It's so helpful to be in a relationship with others who can. Otherwise, it's very hard for it to just receive like an insight on your own about, oh, that I'm missing that, and it can be so helpful to have someone else point it out for you, and
yeah,
it's nice to be able to receive it too, because sometimes it's hard to receive it, and people
yeah.
to point out what's in your blind spot. So yeah, that's what was coming to me. It seems connected to a lot of the things in your title as well.
Yeah, well, I think that's the humility to repent, and I mean, that's kinda tied to what I was talking to yesterday, is, like, seeing confessionalism as the institutionalization of, uh, unrepentance, almost in a way, because, like, you have this, because that's what it is, it's this written law thing, because that's what it's doing, it's trying to put this hard boundary in this written way where, like, if you're not this, then you're out here. But then like, if you don't, that's like it's like, systematically integrating unrepentance, because like if that can't ever change, then you can't ever see the deep calling to deep, the error manifesting outside. So you've limited the mirror, the thing that's outside the camp, to speak to you. Like you've harvested the fringe, you know?
You could, like with confessionalism, you could end up with something like a rigid body, and I could see how that can be helpful for people going on their journey through life to go into a place where there's a confession. But I could also see how people leave that and go into another body that has a different confession, and
Mhm.
you could even have maybe be a part of more than one body. Like maybe you retreat and rest, and another place you go into. Whatever it is you're interested in, and where your gifts are, so that you can participate if there's a need. But yeah, so confessionalism, like, I think it probably gets messed up when you say this is the confession that everyone should accept at all ages throughout their entire life. This kind of universal, like all-encompassing confession is the one that, I mean, I try to think about it. The one I'd mentioned in your comment was I practice loving God. Like
Hmm.
it like, but yeah, I can see how all these other confessions could be appropriate and helpful and very good for certain kinds of people in certain situations at different stages in their life. But that could all be part of a larger body, right? Like one body with a confession can be part of a larger body that consists of those smaller bodies that have confessions that are different.
Yeah, I suppose. Well, yeah, I suppose if there's some kind of, I suppose that would be like a distinction without a difference. But the problem is like if it's kind of like the,
I mean, God created it all in a way, right? It's like, I mean,
what do you mean?
or
All the different groups?
I mean, I like to think that God made me and God made every person, and um, God has like knows everything that's going to happen, right? It's all part of a plan, you know, including the things that we would say are bad and evil and are wrong.
Yeah. Let's bring in some of the, well, that what that reminds me too is like the God sets, is that in a psalm? God sets the boundaries and uh prim like perimeters of kingdoms and kings, and you could maybe say the same thing in confessions too. CW, my boy, my local friend here, opposed to empty formalism, not confessionalism in and of itself.
He's so
Um,
technical. His words are so technical that they often, even yours, like I didn't know what confessionalism was a couple of weeks ago. I had to go talk to GPT-4. It's like, what's confessionalism?
did GPT-4 tell you what confessionalism was?
I use GPT-4 for my Bible study, in lieu of like some pastor. And then I don't trust everything they say, but it can point me and I can go like verify and run it by others. So
Yeah, I think the idea of members and bodies is a key thing. I don't know. To me, that's almost like the most. It is a biblical, uh, you could say metaphor or reality, but I think it's also true, and but it's symbolically true. I think at every, which means like at every level, and so like if the different groups that we're talking about, different confessions, are part of a larger body, what I get concerned about, um, or what I'm trying to critique in my formalism or confessionalism is that
and I don't know what
those,
formalism is. That's to just be blatant, to be clear.
well,
When CW said formalism, I was like, okay, I'm lost now.
right. So like, well, and I'm not totally sure. CW can clarify in the comments, but the formalism would almost be like what Charlie was talking about is, um, it's almost like an allegiance to the law, to the absolute rigid structure and formality of the law without any knowledge or without any flexibility and repentance, with this deep calling to deep, this call and response of how that actualizes in reality.
It's like a
So,
dogmatism or something, like
yeah,
something very
yeah. I mean,
dogmatic.
more or less. Yeah. Within a certain rigid structure that that then in actuality, like this is the difference between intent and then the way that actually manifests in the world, is like, sure, you can say that, and this gets into the members and the bodies, is you could say that like all these different confessions that have evolved, because like if you really look at the history of Protestantism post Luther, Protestantism has splintered and splintered and splintered and splintered into like, how many denominations are there now? I mean, whatever, like, I
And
don't know. What do people say? Like 5,000? Who know? I
so,
mean, I
Luke,
don't know.
when you talk to me, I'm very, like, I am not, Sam Tideman. I'm not, I'm like the amateur. I'm an
Uh,
amateur religious person. And
well,
I'm an
sure, but like,
amateur theologian.
okay. So, but you're following what I mean. Like the
I
number
get what
doesn't
you're,
really
yeah, yeah,
matter.
yeah.
There's a lot of denominations and a lot of different groups, and you could argue that like the projected pattern of that is just like division all the way down to the individual, like me and my own completely individual beliefs.
And so you have a concern as it gets down. Like, you have a concern or critique that I'm not understanding.
So this is what I'm trying to get at with confessionalism, because I'm trying to play off of the members of the body, because you were arguing that like God is orchestrating all this, and so there's a way that those are all within some sort of higher body, which I guess a Protestant would say this is the spiritual church, right? But they have this division between natural and supernatural, spiritual and material. So then the spiritual church is this ethereal, kind of out there body, which we call the church. We've spiritualized it. We've separated into that category of supernatural because we've divorced it from all the individual bodies. They would say are kind of part of that, but there's no natural structure altogether. Whereas in like Catholicism, arguably, even though they've splintered from, or we've splintered, however you want to say that, from Orthodox and Oriental Orthodox, like there's a bunch of different, you have Benedictines and you have Cistercians and you have all these different categories within Catholicism, but they are still underneath the auspices of the Catholic Church. So
Right.
they have distinctions, they have groups, but they're still under one thing. Protestantism doesn't have that kind of explicit structure except in this supernatural spiritual category,
Yeah, they had detected some kind of corruption at some point, right? And we're trying to help with an error correction,
Right.
right?
Right. And that was and you could argue that like that was a good thing. But yet, that's kind of the whole, Paul has talked about this before. That's the difference between like Luther and Erasmus, right? Like Luther was expelled from the church, but like Erasmus would have never left the church. He had the same criticisms, but like he was just like, I'm not leaving the church over this. And Luther arguably didn't want to either. Like, I'm not putting all the
And
blame on
so
Luther. Like,
Erasmus was never disagreed with like the confession, but there were other things that were part of the tradition that Erasmus disagreed with.
well, yeah. I mean, I'm not familiar enough with the particularity of the thing, but my broad understanding of it is that they both had criticisms of Catholicism at that time in regard to indulgences and things like that.
Right.
But it got to the point where like Erasmus was thoroughly, like he would have never left the church. It was very much like I mentioned this in a live stream a while ago. It's like with Maximus the Confessor or whatever, like they ended up cutting out his tongue and like doing all this other stuff to keep him from talking, or like cut off his, I don't know, they cut off his hand or something to keep him from writing. But it was just like he wasn't going to stop. And eventually, he's martyred. He wasn't going to stop saying what he was going to do, but he also was just like, and arguably, who knows, like maybe it took an evolution within history. Maybe he would have been a Luther later on. There wasn't even an idea of leaving the church at the time.
I mean, it could be good. Couldn't it be good to have some stay in the church that are trying to change it internally, and some that are outside trying to do things there as well? Like, can that be good? And even
True.
maybe
Well,
very good and better than if everyone just tried to stay within the church.
well, this is where, yeah, I would say kind of yes and no, playing off of the live stream yesterday, because that is perhaps the good outside of the good that I can currently apprehend. So I am simultaneously critiquing that phenomenon and saying like, I don't like that. I don't think it's good. But it's kind of like what you meant for
Yeah.
evil, I meant for good. God, and I would probably say within my larger 30,000-foot worldview, that's true because it's what's happened. And I think this is the best of all possible worlds. And so if it happened, it must be good. This is where I have this weird non-dual thing where I'll say like that thing is evil, but it's also good. And people are like, what are you saying?
Yeah. There's
It's all about scope, or like what vantage point you're looking at it, I guess.
I read The Hiding Place recently. Are you aware of that book? Corey ten
With
Boom.
Yeah, yep.
Yeah, that was so. It's interesting. Like there can be things that are so, you know, so much pain and suffering, and then like simultaneously there can be like some light shining. like that darkness ends up being opportunity for light to shine. So it's, it's not. I'm also reminded of like Genesis 1. Like I think it says sometimes it said it's good and it is so, and at the very end it says very good. And so it's like, yeah, sometimes this thing could be good or maybe this thing's so, but then when you put them all together, it becomes very good. And but yeah, it's tough, if you're sitting there going through the terrible experience to have faith that it could be part of something very good.
Right. And I think that's ultimately faith. That reminds me of St. Paul. I've learned to be content in all things, whether in want, whether in plenty or in need, whether in jail, whether being like beaten for his faith or whatever. He's just like learning contentedness in all things.
Yeah, there's something. I guess when I was attracted to this one, you had NPCs, and there's a part of me that's like, oh yeah, I get to go talk bad about NPCs or something. And then, but yeah, so there's all kinds of stories like that. But then when Charlie was talking, I was kind of just thinking about the cells in a body. There's things like that. But I mean, to me, the good news is that we can repent. Like we can repent
Well,
at every moment, and that no one's perfect, and none of these
amen.
like bodies in the physical world are perfect. And yeah, and so we can like at every level be repenting. To me,
Yeah, I
that's
mean,
good. That's good news. Like,
dude, if you can't repent, you're essentially screwed. I don't know. I want to throw this
and
idea at you.
it applies in your marriage. It applies like at your work. It applies as a father. Like everything you're doing in life, like at every level, it's so applicable.
I just might be an NPC. So one of the
Yeah,
art, like in the description, I put an article that my buddy Brandon sent me. Shout out Brandon. He probably will never watch this. He's not involved in this little corner, but which is why you are probably an NPC. And the article just goes through all these different types of NPCs, which
yeah.
are essentially like, you know, I'm on the like I'm on I don't know. I should go look at all different types. I can't remember them. Like one of them that I remembered, which is very true because it reminded me of something that I say often is like you can be like I'm on the right side, or I don't want to be an extremist NPC. So like I'm a middler NPC, but that's like an NPC. Like you think the truth is always in the middle. And I've often said, like Satan, demons are smart enough to deceive you on the extremes. They're also smart enough to deceive you in the middle. It's like that verse from Revelation. It's just like, you're lukewarm. I wish you were hot or cold, but you're lukewarm. I'll spew you out my mouth. Like, pick a side. Like you can be deceived by being a middler too. And so, um, there's this line from that article though that I wanted to read. So it says like, um, there's this paradox of unanimity. Since everyone is different, the probability of every single person happening to agree on one belief is tiny, unless some irrational force such as laziness or social pressure is making them agree. In other words, the more people agree, the less likely they are thinking for themselves. And like that's essentially confessionalism to me. Like I'm like, there's no way we all agree on this. There's no way. Like, if you think you agree on this, you're an NPC and you haven't thought about it because you don't really even know what you think. You're just pull parroting what you've been told to think. Because that's one way I've said it before. Like, just because you believe something is what you're supposed to believe doesn't mean you actually believe it.
Here's a membership card to this church I've been going to, and the first checkbox I would have to check is say well, not the first, the third one. I support the church statement of faith, and I've been struggling with that, but it's like a
Yeah,
confession.
so would I.
But the thing is, then I was rereading it, and on it, like I had really thinking and praying, meditating, and then the word says, "I support it." And so I was thinking, like this statement of faith actually can help people who have done terrible sins to help them
Mm,
repent. Like this confession,
mm,
it's like an operating system that's handed over to this NPC that all of a sudden they can become, they're like a very valuable person who's repenting and just doing good in the world. And that's,
Yeah.
so do I support it? That's different than, do I accept this thing myself?
Right.
So, but yeah. And then I found out, like, my big thing is I have trust issues. That's really my problem. My biggest problem on this checkbox is trust issues. So that's what I'm working through. Hey, Paul.
Yeah. Amen.
Yeah, how you doing, Gavin?
I'm doing pretty good today.
Good.
How are you?
I'm doing fine.
It's good to see you.
That's good to see you.
Paul's
busy with a puppy, from what I
Puppy's
understand.
right here. You want to say, puppy? Want to say hello?
Hello, puppy.
That's nice.
Puppy went to class last night and did pretty well, so we're happy with that. Puppy's very, very smart. She just has difficulty behaving herself around other dogs.
Did the puppy go to class, or did the humans go to class to learn?
We go to class together.
That's right.
We're both learning, aren't we?
Because if you send the puppy and then they send the puppy back, then there might be an issue.
Look at all my friends.
Oh, here's Hezzy.
Hezzy.
Oh, he's even
My
at the
heart
park.
goes out to Hezzy.
I'm at jujitsu, but I'm outside.
Hey,
How y'all
Yosef
doing?
Yosef says he can't join because I won't be happy. Come in here and challenge me. And what? You always make me happy. I don't know why I
How are
wouldn't
you doing, Hezzy? What's going on with your nation that the whole world is watching?
Yeah. Very biblical. Very biblical. Horrible stuff. Trying to be optimistic about the situation, ultimately. The silver lining I'm writing right now is that for the last 9 months, there's been a tremendous amount of division. And unfortunately, in biblical fashion, we required a tremendous wake-up call or travesty to unite the country. But we are extremely united again. And to give like 2 points that I try to, look for optimistic signs are the secular restaurants in the progressive Tel Aviv are making all their kitchens kosher so they could send out kosher food to all the soldiers. And the extreme right, ultra-Orthodox civilians that really spend their time learning and not joining the army are inviting people that are displaced right now into their homes, shopping, getting together tremendous amounts of packages for the soldiers. So hopefully after this horrible situation, we will stand stronger and potentially more connected to our democratic process and more connected to our religious roots and be a stronger nation. We hope for the best. But that's me being optimistic.
Why don't the ultra-Orthodox serve in the army? That seems strange. In America, the ultra-Orthodox Christians love to go in the army.
They originally, a group of around 400 of them were exempt by then Ben Gurion, thinking that this is a small group. However, that group has procreated as required biblically. And there are many of them, and they find and see the study of the Torah as the utmost value. Whether or not that is disputed within the sages is a separate conversation. That is what they wholeheartedly believe, and they feel that in the army there are too many issues, religious issues that create conflict. Having said that, when I was in the army, in the Air Force, I oversaw it's called Blue Dawn, bringing in these ultra-Orthodox soldiers into the army and having them working as engineers, and was telling the army basically that there's a tremendous amount of brain power that's not being tapped into, and if we could create certain scenarios that make it more comfortable for them, then we could have all this extra brain power. And in many ways, the government really stepped up. It requires now that from the religious folk to recognize And again, even within the religious frame, there's more than enough reason to, or more than enough ways to show that the establishment and protection of the country and its civilians is also a commandment of the Holy Torah that they want to be studying. So there's one thing studying it, which is a value, and there's another thing which is embodying it. And one would think that a war would be the perfect scenario to embody those values.
Hacksaw Ridge. Has anybody else seen Hacksaw Ridge?
Yeah.
Do that.
Hezzy, how do you live near or far away from the areas of concern?
Israel's very small. It's all very close. Fairly far away from the horrible massacre. There's a tension, which is at what point does this situation change, and hopefully it won't, where one has to start be concerned about Israeli Arabs that live locally in the neighborhoods, and or are we just looking at Gaza Arabs right now? And I hope that never happens, of course. But I did on the way to synagogue on the Sabbath. So I was walking with my son, and missiles were, shot, and my son heard the alarm, which is pretty crazy. But I try to, keep my cool. But ultimately, we went to a corner, and he's wrapped in my prayer shawl. But also, that was also very surreal. He was asking me if we both believe in the same Hashem, why are we fighting? And that opens up a whole can of worms. Which, again, I remain optimistic. I feel like this is gonna sound controversial, but I'm feeling more loose, I guess. There's a difference between being vengeful, which I think a lot of people hear in the sentiment and a lot of Israelis about wanting to wipe Gaza off the face of the earth, and vengeance, biblical vengeance, which I think is a tool, a biblical tool, which we've lost or forgot, that is also a way to show righteousness. And there is good and evil in the world. And I don't know right now. I don't know. I obviously understand that there are millions of innocent civilians in Gaza, and I want them to be able to get out safely. On the other hand, I also understand that I don't know. There really isn't a scenario where an evil like this can remain unanswered. And in 2023, what are the ramifications of that? What does that look like? And are we as a society, how much of Western culture, which we like to think is undergirding it is Judean Christian values, how much of that though has been secularized? Where am I looking at what is considered moral and right through
Whoa.
Oh, wow. I came on here. Hi, Pastor Paul.
Could just be a child
I hope that
emergency.
everything's
Yeah.
fine.
Have to get
Yeah,
up for
well,
the puppy.
everything.
Sometimes that happens when
Oh,
a child
man.
hurts themselves.
Hi, Dolly.
I love his response, though. Hello, Pastor Paul. Wow,
Oh.
this is really cool.
How are you?
Kind of feels more normal now. I'm all right. Yeah, when Chasey was on, I was back and forth, should I come on or not? Because I kind of wanted to just share that a group of us on this side, so I'm in South Africa, on Monday we got to, that's yesterday, no, it was 2 days ago, we got together and we prayed quite a couple of specific prayers to try and cover everything. But within an hour, we all prayed for Israel. And I thought I would just come on and share that with him. Because, yeah, I don't know. And I'm sure that there are other people all over the show also doing that. But, yeah, anyway. But as a part of what you said, Paul, I don't know which video it was, but that one where I commented, this just made me miserable. Because, yeah, but as you ended it off, it's what we can do is pray. And, I just wanted to say that to him. And, then anyway, I'm going to continue to do so. But yeah, I just wanted to do that, but otherwise I'm going to pop off.
Okay.
Well, thank you for sharing that. No, prayer is always a. I don't know, it can get belittled. There's actually this there's that trend, that idea in broader culture. There's actually a really hilarious comedy special. At least I think, called "Thoughts and Prayers" by this guy Anthony Jeselnik, and it's basically
I know
it's
Jesselnick.
yeah it's well
He likes to drop
I
babies.
well he like yeah he's got a certain kind of humor. But it's the idea that thoughts and prayers are just like that's become somewhat of a evangelical platitude in secular culture. People mock it like, well, I'm going to do nothing, like I'll just pray for you, meaning like I will throw out this empty platitude that means nothing. But i don't I don't think that's true. I don't know, it's just really been, I've had different thoughts on prayer throughout my life, but I think that it's something that, one of the benefits of tragedy like this is it does cause people to really pray, not just say they're praying, but to actually pray. So
In Northern California, they try to send good energy.
yeah,
I, I
same
like
thing,
the
right?
I like the prayer. Say, what should I do? I got up in bed this morning and was like, should I lay back down or should I get up? And I heard you'll get your day of rest. It's like it's nice laying down and resting, but yeah, that's the kind of prayer I'm trying to practice. Is saying, what should I do next? Where should I go? It's like,
Joseph.
Yeah,
Hey,
what's up, brother?
thought I'd pop
Come
on for
on.
a minute. Yeah, it should be working, so it won't be too long. But thought I'd say hi. Yeah. Well, I'm glad. I mean, Chazi said it better than I could. I mean, he's there, and I think we're pretty much on the same wavelength on a lot of this stuff. But yeah, I mean, the prayer thing. This gets into the whole question about why the ultra orthodox, or most of them, went out serving in the military in Israel. I mean, part of it is they don't recognize it as a legitimate Jewish state, but part of it is just they think that they are protecting it spiritually through their Torah study. They have this model, biblical model. There's Chazi's back. Hey, Chaz. Um, this model. It's based on Yisachar and Zvulun, actually, in the Torah portion we read just on Sunday when all this was happening. On where we finished like the cycle of the Torah readings, and it basically is understood that Zvulun kind of did the commerce and the protecting and all that stuff, and Yisachar was the tribe that produced like the members of the Sanhedrin and studied and whatever, and one did spiritual warfare and the other one did like physical warfare. But that's a very different, I'd say, it's almost like a two world problem, almost like way to look at it, where it's kind of right, like there's the metaphysics and the physics are separated on this. But going back long before the 20th century. And yeah, I think there's a strong argument for embodiment here, as one of the modern Orthodox. So therefore, someone who's religious but would serve near me. One of the podcasters said, prayers are super important, but prayers are not in place of action. Prayers are a supplement to action. And they shape how we take those actions. But you can't then, prayer has to have a purpose. It can't just be sitting back and praying. So I mean, I've been doing that. I'm back here, and I can't do so much. Maybe send money or some mental, emotional support, whatever, when I can. But prayer is a lot of what we, those of us in diaspora. There's only so much we can do. And becoming reacquainted with the Book of Psalms, because there's some I know really well, and some, I probably never actually said as prayer before, even if I study them. But that's the book we all turn to when we're praying, and there's like a million groups. They're just like cycling through Psalms constantly, 24 hours a day at this point.
I would.
Did you hear what Dali said?
I did hear what Dolly said. Yeah. First of all, I'm sorry that I ran off some kid, like fell off a rock and opened her jaw, but she's okay now.
Oh, geez.
Sorry, not opened her jaw. Sorry, cut her chin. Sorry. I think I really appreciate what Dolly said, and I think prayer does go a very long way because it allows us to feel connected, as both definitely as a people, but as humans. And even in this little corner, I've gotten a lot of love, which is not something that you would necessarily think. and there's a lot of prayer going and support going around the world, and that allows you to feel seen, and I think that does, you have a lot of psychological warfare because of social media today and misinformation. You could also obviously, like these tools and this AI we always talk about, it's up to us if whether we want to use the blessings in these technologies or the curses in these technologies. But having a prayer make its way around and having Dolly see me for a second, and even though I just ran off and I didn't even hear the conversation, we're talking about it right now. So I am a believer of that kind of prayer. With regards to the division you made, Yosef, of Zvulun and Issachar, uh, I'm more interested in the division of the Messiah, son of Joseph, and the Messiah, son of David, and specifically how it's talked about in Zechariah about the great eulogy that will be in Jerusalem, and how there was always a division in Israel between the tribes and Judah, and there was some that were more secular and some that were more religious. And again, I think it requires an understanding from within of where we hold our religion and where we hold our our modern operating system that we find ourselves in. And this goes back to also Paul's winsome wars of where we find ourselves today. Um, so yeah, a part of me feels like, again, like I said, like this biblical, there needs to be a biblical response, and that's what you hear people talking about. But on the other hand, I don't know, I feel like this is in some way a unique opportunity for Israel to really shine in some way, but I don't know, I can't see what that answer is. I don't know how they're supposed to respond, and it's just very heartbreaking right now, to be honest. And Yosef, I know you and I have been talking about this a little behind the scenes, but yeah, I don't know. I still haven't found my response, aside from the fact that I feel that Israel has to come out resolved from this, and I hope the whole world could become resolved to this. Hopefully, this is enough to. You want to say that this is enough to shake up the world and tell us that like really enough is enough. But on the other hand, like there's been this Russia war going on, and we were all excited for about a week and a half, and then it becomes like the backdrop on the noise, and that's still going on. There's Russians and Ukrainians fighting in the forest, and how long can that hold our attention?
I'm curious about so Ben Shapiro says, if you're anti-Zionist, you're anti-Semitic, and I immediately thought of Jacob, of course, who is clearly not anti-Semitic, but he's anti-Zionist. What's the relationship between the ultra-Orthodox and Zionism? I mean, they're living in the country, but that's hard for me to understand.
Yosef, take this one. I'll join in a second.
Okay, that's right. I mean, he probably has a better on the ground view, but because of the Holocaust and because of the Cold War, and because of immigration policies post-Holocaust, Jews had to go somewhere, and Israel became the very obvious place, especially for the ultra-Orthodox to go. Of course, some came to the United States and to other countries like the Netherlands and in the UK, but most of them went to Israel because it was a safe haven and a refuge. At the same time, they didn't recognize the legitimacy of the state necessarily at various degrees. There's some extreme ones that wouldn't pay taxes even. Most of them minimally did that. They kind of worked out a tentative agreement with Ben Gurion that they could kind of exist as an autonomous enclave within the state, basically building on a European shtetl model, but treating the Israeli state, even though it was run by Jews, as essentially a secular state, and they would be the little shtetls within inside it. Wow. That essentially gave them a couple of things, including like independence. They didn't have to. I mean, they still pay taxes. They still get lots of welfare, but they don't have to serve in the army. That's been a huge fight, especially as their population grew, because at what point do you say they have to serve in the army? Because if they're 10, 15, 20% of your population, you really need those bodies. I mean, he was focusing on brains, but bodies. I mean, most of the support the Haredim are giving right now, those that have kind of had this shift given the current war, is physical. It's providing logistical support. It's providing homes. It's providing cooking food and getting kitchens kosher and driving soldiers to bases and whatever it is, donating, toiletries. But basically, except for extreme situations, they've essentially been semi-autonomous, and they've essentially been given control over their own neighborhoods. And in some ways, the chief rabbinate and the rabbinate in general's role is to kind of broker that relationship. And at some point, the religious parties the religious groups realize, it's not religious, because there's other people religious like Chezi who are Orthodox but not who are Zionists. That's why we're called the religious Zionists, except that term itself has been kind of colonized lately by groups we don't necessarily agree with. But historically, we've been the religious Zionists, and they've been the religious non-Zionists, I would say. I mean, it's all controversial. They take a massive amount of the amount of welfare goes to them proportionally to their population, because they have huge families, and for the most part, the men don't work. They learn all day, or they learn half the day. So their wives often support those families. It's a very kind of flipped. In the religious world of like the U.S., it's hard to understand perhaps because it's not a Protestant work ethic in the same sense. The men's job is seen as idealized as learning all day. Religious texts, it's kind of like supporting monasteries, except they're married and they have 8 kids, and the wives are working 1, 2, 3 jobs, whatever. The wives tend to have much higher secular education than their husbands because of that, which also kind of creates interesting dynamics. There are special schools that have been set up so they can be in gender segregated learning environments, but for a long time that wasn't even the case. There are more guys sort of getting into it, especially as their population grows and like they realize not everyone is built for learning, religious texts all day. Not everyone is propositional. Not everyone, excels in those environments. The economics of it are very hard. So it has been shifting a lot the past 10 years, but it's still whatever. It's still kind of set in its ways, and the shifts have been marginal, increasing, but still marginal. So it's interesting. It's very, very kind of. Oh, we got an apron on there. Okay. I don't know. Hopefully that was somewhat useful, but
I would add, Yosef, that because the population got so big, and because they see that this model is not tenable, and I think many of them just due to just evolving, many of them want to participate more. There are many schools, colleges that are opening up for the ultra-Orthodox, and I believe, and this is hard to ask for a country to do, because I think by force you'll just get a very, very, there will be a pendulum swim. Like they'll push back in too extreme a way. And I think if we just waited out a little longer, it's going to happen within itself. Like there's so many of them that are eager to know more, to learn more, to engage more. And I think it requires still another generation of leaders to sort of to make way. And I think that it requires just a little more time. Unfortunately, it's a very hard ask on the population. And I think on, like Yosef said, the religious Zion front, I think we dropped the ball and we allowed Israel as a Jewish state to be defined really by this ultra-Orthodox group. And that is a very specific model. And I think that also creates attention.
We should take a step back there to explain. So this beginning of the shift happened in the 80s, really, when the ultra-Orthodox decided to get involved in Israeli politics. Paralleling somewhat the evangelicals in the U.S. at the same time, and that was rather controversial because before that they had been autonomous and they kind of were doing their own thing. But once they were big enough where they realized, oh wait, we have a lot of voters and we could have political power and be involved in parliament. And this happened separately, earlier in the Ashkenazi side, later in the Sephardi side, and there's a great movie that just came out about the founding of the major religious kind of ultra-Orthodox Sephardi party, political party. But there was a lot of kind of racism between the two sides, honestly, which is why they created separate parties, and a huge other issues that happened. It was 70s and 80s, and power movements of various sorts kind of also trickled through Israel, of course. But and there have been racism before that warranted some of those kind of reactions to some degree, though pendulum swings are what they are, as we know. But so if that generation is kind of established that it's normal for the ultra-Orthodox to engage at a political level in some way and use their political hammer and bodies to vote, the next generation now started to warm up to more engagement. But yeah, I think Chazi's right. Probably this war might accelerate it, but really it needs another generation before we have kind of, I'd say, integration of a meaningful sort and numbers that matter. But so that's the missing piece here, I think.
I would say I would add one more point that, and this Jacob and I disagree with, but unfortunately, I think that they are holding on and representing a exile version of the Torah. And I think at some point, and maybe it will be a newer generation that has to create a redemption version of Torah and homeland Torah. And that looks different. And I think that's very scary for a lot of people because that requires changes. It also requires leadership, which we have none of. But I think that's a big problem.
I would say that part of that is also because of the respect for the elderly, and this is, let's say, in contrast to Western society in general, whoever is kind of the oldest living, well-respected rabbi becomes the head of the ultra-Orthodox parties, which means that they basically had leaders in their mid to late 80s or early 90s for the past 10, 15 years. But at the same time, these guys have, 8, 10 kids, in each generation. You're talking about huge youth side, to this. So there's kind of this tension, generational tensions happening. On the one hand, I don't want to get rid of that respect for the elderly. I mean, I think there's something absolutely amazing about it. On the other hand, there is this really big generational disconnect that it makes them conservative in a way that's hard to explain because it's not conservative and it's a small c conservative and not like a politically conservative as much as like these are guys who grew up in the 1940s, right, or 50s. These are guys who grew up during the Holocaust or right after. And some of them even were born in the DP camps or in Europe in shtetls, and their parents were killed in the Holocaust or whatever it was. So when you talk about like a diaspora mindset, like it's not just like my mindset versus Chazi because I live in the U.S. We're talking about a very old style European mindset, which in some ways is kind of our last connection to pre-war Judaism and all of its beauty and kind of culture and infrastructure and all that stuff and they're trying to perpetuate that to some degree. At the other hand, because they're trying to preserve it as like the last vestiges of that. At the same time, it means that they've been very slow, and Chazi is always kind of bothered by this. They're very slow at talking about new technologies and their impacts. They're going to be very conservative when it comes to anything like, cell phones were banned in the Haredi world and any type, smart or not smart, until a couple of years ago, basically. I mean, people basically only men could have them for business, and you had to get permission from your rabbi and whatever. It was like insane. These people do not have TVs. They don't have TVs in their homes. They almost rarely have computers except for desktops for businesses. Now, in the past 10, 15 years, that's changed. People need more cell phones. They've allowed them. There's kosher phones that are smartphones that have like everything blocked, essentially. There's all this stuff they've tried to adapt, but they're still 10 years behind on it, or maybe more, on responding to a lot of technology. And then forget like social societal change. Like everything is going to be like they don't need, like the entire debate over wokeness, LGBTQ stuff, whatever, is so out of their like world. It's not even like they don't have a way to address it, and they're not. And the responses have generally been like just blanket, not allowed, we're done, no more discussion. Which isn't surprising because, I mean, if you're talking to 90-year-olds who are religiously, from that world, what else are you going to expect? But there's a lot of kind of stuff involved, and there's always kind of like up and coming rabbis in their 60s or 70s who are trying to like push the envelope a little bit, and they're seen as the radicals, right? But that's kind of part of this dynamic, which is this really hard to like for people outside of Israel or outside of the Haredi world to even understand. And the U.S. is a little bit different. The U.S. the leaders are a little bit younger, just for kind of obvious reasons. Yeah. Anyway.
Wow.
But,
imagine if 15% of America were Amish and they decided to get politically active.
Basically, yeah.
Whoa.
It's hard. Yeah. Yeah, it's hard. It's just as hard to imagine. It's and there's a reason why in general Haredim in America have tried to stay very autonomous in their communities, and that's also we're a generation behind here in some ways, because we're now seeing politically active Haredi communities in places like Lakewood and Muncie who are actually trying to use their population numbers to like decide county or school district policies, which are hugely controversial. And part of that comes from like historical grievances with not getting along with their neighbors, or people just not understanding their needs or who they are. There's a lot of issues around providing busing.
Did the leadership ever like step down? Like do they ever step down?
Usually not until they're incapacitated. So think about like there's no retirement age, right? Like they do once they're mentally incapacitated, they tend to step down. They're not like trying to stay in there longer. Like people usually, sometimes there's politics, which the people in their inner circle try to keep them basically propped up, because they don't want to lose that, because it's so much based around individuals, and not parties in many ways.
There's not like a tradition of trying to like lift someone up, if you're in there, like mentoring people into the.
Oh, there's definitely that. There's whole structures, hierarchies of mentorship, but you're not going to be the one calling the shots, right? Like, I mean, you might be internally, but the people
don't like to step down, basically.
Oh, they won't step down because of also like, we have this concept that's kind of inverted from Christianity in some ways, where like the further we get from Sinai or from Abraham or whatever, the weaker like the connection is, the spiritual connection is, that things get lost over generations, mimetic tradition. And I know Chazi can go on about this, he's shaking his head. But there is this really strong concept of this, which means that the people, of course, who represent and lived in Europe before the war, or during the war, whatever, and have that connection to that lost world are going to have the most authority. And then it will be the people who are their immediate students after them. And then it will be the immediate students of those guys, because we're really, this is such a tradition-focused culture, and has this idea that things kind of get lost over generations.
In a rapidly changing world.
Yeah.
Okay, Chazi clearly has something to say, but then I want to let Michael say something too.
Yeah. No, Michael, take it away. Go ahead.
Well, it's finally glad I was able to jump into one of these, because all this stuff is, very interesting. I've kind of been observing, going back to like the confessional conversation. It's just been really interesting because I follow so many diverse Christian, accounts on Twitter and stuff, or X or whatever. But to see like how people are having to kind of, they had a pre-formed belief about like whatever the relationship is between the Christian church and the Jewish people, or and sometimes making distinctions about Israel as a nation versus Jewish believers, and it's definitely I'll put it this way. So the person that was making the most sense of the situation was Sam Harris, by basically, saying, if you're, the group that's using human shields is bad. And, he doesn't have like, of course, the whole Sam Harris problem is he doesn't have a moral basis for saying why that's bad, because he doesn't believe in God or any, morality, but clearly he sees, that situation. And so it's just been interesting. It's interesting seeing how the how events in the world and things, it necessarily causes people to reconsider the confessional frames that they look through.
Well, and to tie this into what we were talking about earlier, I mean, and the last live stream, discernment and judgment, and what what Sartori Pilgrim was saying earlier, Charlie. Just judgment is necessarily, I think, it's this external thing where we're making a pronouncement, good and bad. Discernment is necessarily like involving self-action. And so like you can say, like to that point, people using human shields bad. Okay, that's a judgment. Discernment is how do I react to that? What do I do in relation to that? Which is fundamentally a personal thing. Because you could have the reaction to that, we go to war. Or you could have the reaction to that I personally will go to war, like Hacksaw Ridge, and I'm not taking any life. I'm protecting life. And this, I mean, that's where I would say is like I'm a Christian nonviolent pacifist, like I'm not gonna, and I'm open to being wrong about that in the final analysis when God measures out, as Chad has said, the wheat from the chaff and picks the weeds, and I'll be judged by God at that point. But like to want to take your judgment and unilaterally absolutize it to say everyone must do the same thing as what I say in my judgment is what, I don't know, nations do, which is also why I'm an anarchist.
Well,
Yeah, that's. I always feel like, and the way I see it is like there's difficult discussions because of the plurality of things, but like from my position, I'd be like, I am, I'm not necessarily a pacifist, but I would want myself or other people who are not pacifists to be willing to defend your right to be a pacifist, because of,
Sure.
and that's what I mean, even saying, because like when you look at the Christian landscape, you can see like, I guess this is the problem with a confession, is that once you lock into a confession, you say this is the right way. Whereas I can say, well, this group's come to interpret nonviolence as the correct action in the world, whereas another group comes to the conclusion that defending your homeland is a correct action. And so, well, clearly those are, somewhat mutually exclusive. So we need to be able to accommodate both of them. And so the way that it should work is that those that are willing to fight ought to protect those who do not want to fight, But,
well, but this gets into the whole issue with what we were just talking about with the ultra-Orthodox and Israel fighting. And like, at what point is your population, if you have 90% of your population, let's say your male population learning religious texts all day, only 10% willing to fight, you don't necessarily have enough to protect 90, right? So like there's a balance there. That may just statistically, I mean, I know Luke is not going to like things at scale, but like at some scale, it's not going to be sustainable.
Well, I remember that was something that was in one of those Jonathan Peugeot history videos, talking about when Constantinople fell, that there was more men becoming monks and women becoming nuns than there was soldiers and wives and mothers. Mm-hmm. And so they reached a tipping point where it was imbalanced in that way. So, whatever that balance is.
Two things. My ideal hero of my view of war and Christian nonviolence is Desmond Doss. That dude was like the most heroic person, arguably, on Hacksaw Ridge. He was the one going headlong into violence to protect and save people and risking his own life, but he just wasn't killing anyone. That's Christian nonviolence. So it's not about stepping back in cowardice and not being willing to die. And I would say also, like in the whole thing, perfect love casts out fear, and fear. I think a lot of war is about, ironically, fear and fear of death. As a Christian, we're called to embrace death. I mean, hello, Jesus Christ. So like, I'm not really afraid of someone wiping me out with violence, because that's what happened to my Savior. So
That's interesting. I was just listening to something about the rules, the Jewish rules for war. That was Maimonides' kind of expansion on Maimonides on the verse in Deuteronomy when you were dismissing people from serving, right? So in Deuteronomy, it has this whole thing like if you just married someone in the last year, if you just built a house, if you just planted a vineyard, and then the last one is if the person is afraid, they're not allowed to fight. And the way Maimonides kind of learns that out, it seems, is you can't have your mind on anything else when you go to war. Essentially, you have to be only thinking about defending the people, and you can't have a distraction. Which is why if you just got married or you just built a house or whatever, those would be distractions, and you can't be there. But fear, which is kind of given this like extra long kind of explanation and set apart from that passage a little bit, as like in this pattern of like the 3+1 pattern, where you have kind of the three things and then like the one kind of more intense or bigger thing, right? Which is a biblical pattern. So that one is because it says it's contagious. Fear is contagious, but it's also like you cannot be fighting if you're like. It was just interesting. So it kind of goes against the whole like you'd only be brave if you're afraid kind of whole mantra. Whereas here, like for war, Maimonides really doesn't think you can bring fear to it, or you kind of you'll come at it from the wrong place. And this gets into what Chazi was using interesting language earlier. He said biblical violence or biblical vengeance or something. But biblical is very ambiguous there, right? Because there's kind of like this, I would say, very Christian influenced view of the Old Testament biblical kind of God violence judgment. But whereas like I would have in my other kind of Jewishy world, when I think of like biblical vengeance, I think of vengeance is mine, and man is not supposed to take vengeance, and it's kind of other model of justice, which is kind of where vengeance is not. I wouldn't say it's totally off the table, but it's very, very limited and controlled in a way, and directed. Right? It's very and I think there is. I want to just point. I think that ambiguity kind of plays out with what we're talking about here a little bit, between these like kind of models of how we understand, like, what Michael was saying.
I would just say, with regards to discernment, though, using a bit. I mean, I don't know the exact wording in English, but when Moses goes out and he sees the Egyptian hitting the Hebrew, he looks this way and that. And he sees that there's, in Hebrew, it's Vayara ki and Ish, and he saw that there was no one there. But in Hebrew, Ish could be seen as man, as in he saw that there was nothing here. There was no cheek to turn the other side. This is completely wrong, and that's why he decides to act. But he first looks, he first tries to discern and see if he's making the right action. And then again, symbolically, he then covers that with sand, as this to show like this is buried. This kind of behavior is ultimately buried. We see that culminate in the actual Exodus, right? So like, well, God is letting them know that this behavior is no longer going to be permitted. But yes, vengeance is God's, but there is a place where you could see, if one could discern, or one told by God that this is evil, then there is more room to act, or potentially there is a need to act.
Well, and I think too, because fear goes like, there's like a hierarchy of fears. And so if your highest fear is your physical pain, then yeah, you probably shouldn't be out there on the battlefield. You're not going to contribute well. But like, I'd say that's not my fear of like my family being harmed is greater than fear for my own pain. So that would motivate me to fight. And of course, the highest should be your fear of God, which is, that you would disappoint him, that you would be, that you would rebel against him. So if you're, if your fear of God may take you in many directions, but I think it's what you fear more kind of affects things.
Yeah, I don't want to, one thing I want to say for clarity is I don't want to absolutize my judgment either, which is like William Branch, about sacrificing your family for your own self-righteousness or something. I don't want to absolutize my judgment and say everybody has to act, according to my convictions either. You know, like that's discernment is your thing. You know, you live your life. You will. Tim shall. You mayest. You make your choices and live with it. I'm opposed to the idea that anyone would absolutize their own judgments and convictions, especially in a systematic way, and impose them on everyone else, inhibiting their own will.
The libertarian thing is, I think, you know, it's an important move, but part of what I saw, I didn't talk about it a lot in today's video, but you know, there's definitely an aspect of principalities. And if you're a religious minority who is having political agency but not contributing, I mean, obviously, part of what's, and I know very, very little about this, I've been trying to learn a little bit, but part of what's going on in this situation is, you know, Hamas striking from Gaza is different from the Iranian Republican Guard attacking, because in that sense, you've got a nation state of Israel and you've got a nation state of Iran, and they both sort of have this same thing. But when you have a terrorist group, whether it's Al Qaeda attacking the United States from Afghanistan or Hamas from Gaza, that there's an asymmetry in there. And so, you know, Hacksaw Ridge works as long as there is a line which is defended, which he drags the people over. So these systems are not isolated from each other; they're interconnected.
Sort of. I think it's complicated because Hamas is not just a terrorist organization. They've been running a state essentially for the past, you know, however many years.
And elected.
And elected, right? They're an elected political party. I mean, obviously they rigged the elections, but like it's not a. But like they've been providing they've been providing civil infrastructure services, right? They run the power plants and the water treatment. I mean, obviously Israel has to provide a lot of that because they're not super self-sufficient, but like, and Egypt also, right? Egypt also provides a lot, but I would say they're more than something like an Al Qaeda. And maybe they're closer to an ISIS, but I don't think ISIS ever actually provided services. So maybe really the Taliban's the closer thing, right? They're running a country, but then what's the line? Are the Iranians took over their country in a very similar way as the Taliban, and some, you know, we can loosely compare them. At what point does that organization grow from a terrorist group to a political organization that actually like is sort of at the same level? Like obviously, Hamas has never signed any international accords. It's not part of the Geneva Convention. It's not part of any of these things, and they have no interest. I mean, even if they had a full state, they wouldn't sign those things. I'm not. At least I'm certainly don't see any signs of it. But yeah, there's a question I think of when we say equal footing, that there's kind of a, do they have the power, money, infrastructure, population, whatever? There's do they have the political, like a credibility or authority? And then there's also this like third category, which is like, are they part of the international nation state system, and therefore bound, or at least feel somewhat bound by its rules, regulations, pressures, even if they're not actually bound by the rules, there may be pressures. And, you know, on those three counts, Hamas kind of clicks two of those three boxes. But I mean, yeah, and there's a clear border, right? This isn't the West Bank. There's a clear, I mean, there's the borders there are much more fuzzy because there's like all these different zones. In Gaza, once the pullout happens, they have full control. I mean, whatever you want to call that, of this territory up to that fence. And that, you know, obviously for worse instead of better, but whatever.
I'm just hearing what also Paul is saying, and just thinking about, let's say, the asymmetry, but also, are we on the same court? Are we playing the same game? And this also, we're starting Genesis now. So when Cain and Abel, those boys, Cain tells to Abel, my brother, calls him my brother, and then it says Vayakom, and he rose up or got up. I don't know what the exact translation is in English. And the sages ask about this. Why does it mention, does he rise up? Was he lying down? Was he sitting down? Like, what was happening beforehand? And they say that there was already a wrestle. They were wrestling beforehand, but Abel was much stronger. and Abel had managed to lie down and was on top of Cain. Then Cain uses the term "my brother." So Cain thinks, we're playing the same game again. I realize I've managed to reform him. I'm going to get up. When he gets up, then he turns the tables on him and kills him. And then the question is here: is someone using the term brother right now? Am I being forced to look at this organization or the people living there still through the brother frame, or and after 75 years of, and this is what Jacob, being inside a secular system, which again is using the moral, goggles or glasses or oculus of, this modern morality, is that blinding us in a certain sense?
Yeah, I mean, on the Genesis bit, one, I mean, I don't think they won't get it, but in Hebrew, we know Vayakom also means to take vengeance. So getting up and taking vengeance are etymologically the same, and I mean, not just etymologically. Here, it's actually the same exact word. Like, it's just two uses of the same piece of one word. But
that's another interpretation.
Well, no, it's not another. It's part of why the sages go there in that reading with the wrestling. It's part of the foundation of that reading. But I don't read it. I mean, I have a different take on the whole story, but that's a whole thing for another discussion. I've talked about it on Grail Country before. You can look there. But I do think that part of it is part of that other reading is that Cain is very much still trying to fix the sin of Eden, and he sees the world through that. That's why when he hears God warn him, he hears it through the language of the curse of his mother, and it's why he offers God a fruit. He's trying to fix it. He's very fixated on the past and fixing the past in a very kind of, I'd say, rigid way. And to me, when I hear the word Vayakom, I think, well, that word, we've had that word before in Genesis. One other time is when Adam gets up from sleeping, when Eve's been taken off of him, right? So there's this like weird set of parallels in all the language. I mean, there's a lot of resonances between chapter 3, which is Cain and Abel, and chapter 2, which is other way. Chapter 4, which is Cain and Abel, and chapter 3, which is Adam and Eve and the sin in the garden, where Cain he's so fixated on the past and kind of the trauma of the garden, the sin of the garden. And I mean, to me, that's a lot. That's a lot of what's happening here. Trying to fix and undo or whatever the trauma by kind of almost repeating it over and over again. And you repeat it different ways each time, so you can't always predict exactly how it's going to fall out. But if that's your model, you're not going to ever actually make progress and fix things. And yeah, I mean, look, neither Cain or Abel win, right? They both fail, and they need a third child to kind of rectify all that. And even that, I mean, so for us, this is a huge difference between us. Oh, Luke, you're muted. I see you're trying to maybe talk. But for us, this is a huge difference between like me and like Jonathan Peugeot and how like I read this text, is because in our tradition, Cain does repent. I mean, there's a minority position that he doesn't, but the majority of people read him as repenting, and they partially, one of the ways to see that is he names all his children. Well, so the last generation of Cain's children of the 7 generations are all named after Abel, Yuval and Tuval Cain and all those guys. And they all kind of have these like shepherding adjacent professions. And there seems to be kind of this fix, but of trying to bring his brother back into the world almost. And then we see with Seth names all his kids again after Cain's kids, which is like also interesting. And there seems to be this attempt at integration and like healing, but it takes generations and generations and generations to get there. And it eventually fails. I mean, there's still the flood and there's still Noah. But something that I always took a lot of heart in was the midrash about Noah's wife. So it's her name. She's not in the midrash. She's Naamah, and we know who Naamah is. Naamah is a descendant of Cain, and Cain actually, in a way, survives the flood. because through his descendant. And it's but it's not just like this evil spirit of Cain. It's this repented, fixed spirit, this metanoia, whatever, atoned spirit of Cain that kind of comes through and goes through the flood. Yeah. So
Luke,
to me,
you
this is like,
want to lock us back into discernment? I want to derail this conversation.
Yeah. No, let's go back to discernment, because that's all about Eve. Eve is all about judgment and discernment at the apple, or the fruit, or whatever, not the apple, the fruit, right? She sees it's good. She just sees it look good to eat and it's good to the eyes. And one of the favorite readings I have of the sin of Eden, going back, like tying us all together, is it's not about disobeying God and eating the fruit. I mean, that is a sin, but that's a minor sin. Really, what they're punished for, because what you look at when you look at how they're punished and like what the curses are, except for the snake, really what the punishment seems to be is that they don't react properly to their sin. They don't discern, that they blame each other and passing the buck, and they don't, like, she's supposed to be there to help Adam, and she's supposed to be part of his flesh, and instead they just are left pointing the finger at each other, and that is in fact the worst sin at Eden, which is a reading I really like, and there's a lot of kind of evidence of that in other kind of biblical texts that reference Garden of Eden, as well as kind of the Midrashic tradition. So I'm gonna leave it there. I just talked a while. I know Luke wants to say something. Bring it back.
No, I don't. I mean, the discernment and judgment is definitely something that I've been thinking about a lot. I was going to a while back when Yosef was talking. I was thinking of Hebrews 9 when you were talking about Cain, and I think it's Hebrews 9 where it says Christ came for judgment. So like, I don't know, sorry, my Jewish friends, I want to read this section of Hebrews 9 because it was reminding me of Cain being focused back on the sin of the garden and staying in this place of focusing on sin and thinking about sin. So this is about sacrifice and Christ, and Jacob will love it if he watches this. Jacob's a big fan of the book of Hebrews. This is, therefore it was necessary for the copies of the things in the heavens to be cleansed with these things, but the heavenly things themselves with better sacrifices than these. For Christ did not enter a holy place made by hands, a mere copy of the true one, but into heaven itself, now to appear in the presence of God for us. Nor was it that he would offer himself often, as the high priest enters the holy place year by year with a blood that is not his own. Otherwise he would have needed to suffer ever since the foundation of the world. But now, once at the consummation of the ages, he has been revealed to put away sin by the sacrifice of himself. And just as it is destined for people once to die, and after this comes judgment, so Christ also, having been offered once to bear the sins of many, will appear for a second time for salvation, without reference to sin, to those who eagerly await him. And so that, I don't know, it popped into my head. It was a glittering thing, and it made me think of without reference to sin, judgment being without reference to sin, and that made me think of Cain ending up in violence. I mean, if Yosef's interpretation, and if I heard that correctly, about looking back to the sin of the garden, kept him in this place of violence and fear and comparison and gaming, because he's playing a different game than Abel was playing, this competitive zero-sum game. But what does it mean to have judgment without relation to sin?
Well, so here's where it gets complicated, because in Leviticus, we are called to discern or judge between, I would like to use the word discern here because how you're using it, between clean and the unclean, pure and impure, the animals, all those, that whole list, right? That's the job of the priest, is to do all this discernment, right? They're the only ones who can declare someone having leprosy, right? And part of that is they have to sit among the lepers to do so. They need to actually, right? So like, to me, that's a very powerful part. And then there's another thing that complicates this, which is, so this is all in Genesis 3, but in 1 Kings 3, something that Jason pointed out to me a while back, that the language around Solomon getting, being blessed. He asks God for wisdom. God says, "What do you want? You've been like my faithful servant," whatever it is. And God says, "You did good, not choosing life or riches," which is life for riches is interesting because life seems to be a reference. But you chose the knowledge of good and evil. Right? That's what it says in the text, right? Which seems very obviously it's referencing Eden, and it's interesting that life also comes up in that verse, and that God, after the sin, seems to want to push us to, at some level, the role of the priest is to do discernment. What's that mean? And so I don't want to necessarily say, so I wanted to nuance what you said a little bit, Luke, because I don't think our job is to ignore sin. And I think there's so much of the Bible is about thinking about and rectifying, harms we've done, or not causing others harm, right? So much of it is about that, and it includes atonement. And if you don't have atonement, atonement is very much about a way to fix sin. But I think what the Bible does is it realizes that atonement is actually really hard, and the way that Cain was trying to do it was not effective. Because it doesn't really cause a change of heart. It was not a new covenant, whatever you want to call it. It was not that, right? It was this weird psychological kind of twisty parasitic processing thing, right? Right. So I think a lot of what the Bible comes is in light of, especially the Hebrew Bible. I'm not going to talk about your Bible because I think it does kind of go in different directions, and I don't know it well enough to just do it off the cuff. But the Hebrew Bible, a lot of it. I mean, thinking about what it means in the wake of eating of the fruit, and what the Bible envisions humanity's role in the wake of eating that fruit, and specifically the Jewish role. What's it mean to be a nation of priests if the role of the priest is discernment? Yes, the actual priests within Israel have even higher levels of rules about that type of stuff. But the priests are the mediators. The priests are the ones who help with atonement in many ways, right? They're the ones who help not just with atonement, but with not even with things that aren't sins. Like leprosy isn't a sin. It might be caused by a sin, but it's not in itself. It's not a sin. But there's a lot of things that are not sins. A lot of the impurity stuff's not sins, right? And
sure, you can come on and take over for me if you want.
I'll
take some masculinity out.
I need to go back to work too, though.
I want to dovetail on what's something that you were saying, Yosef, just with regard to the discernment and going back to Eden, because when Adam and Eve enjoy their fruit, right? Vatifakachna enehem, and their eyes were opened, and we see the flip side of that with Isaac. And when we're telling the story of Isaac, we know that his eyes are closed, which also stresses the fact that why could he not discern between Esau and Jacob, right? He was gonna give Esau, right? And that's because there's a sense where, if we remember, Isaac was ready to sacrifice himself with Abraham, and also there the text says that God tested Abraham, and there's a question: why is he not testing Isaac? Because Isaac's walking up all a hunky dory about this, and there's a sense where he's accepting this, and he's discerning as in pre-fall, pre-sin. And that's why he can't discern anymore between good and evil. And the problem is that kind of vision doesn't work.
I don't think so. So I wrote you've read my article on this, right?
I'm disagreeing with you.
Have you read my article on that?
I've read it.
And the Midrashim about how the tears of either the angels or Abraham fall into Isaac's eyes and cause him to be blind. Right, he's blinded by trauma. He's as blinded by trauma as Cain is.
Yeah, PTSD. It's the first version of PTSD. My point still being about the discernment, though, that he can't see the difference. And then going back to what you're saying about the priest.
To me, that's Cain, though. To me, Cain can't see the difference. Cain is trying to live pre-Eden still. He can't see the difference between him and Heth.
I'm with you.
Right, okay.
I'm with you. He can't. And I'm saying Isaac, it's a fail on Isaac's part. We're seeing a glimpse of that's why he can't discern between both of his sons. And there needs to be a correction there, because in this plane on earth, we need to discern.
Right, I don't know that we're disagreeing ultimately then.
I'm just saying I'm dovetailing you. I meant I disagreed with the fact that it's because the angels cried in his eyes and that's why he became blind. I understand that's supposed to be symbolic.
I think even there we agree. I think even there at some level, maybe not at surface level. I think that they're ultimately the thing behind the things. We're on Luke's podcast here.
All right.
We agree.
Right. It's and or. So yeah.
So do you
Luke,
think
you must.
discernment? Do you think discernment requires, in order to not be, the knowledge of good and evil is necessary, that the whole he mayest thing, like that verse, that whole East of Eden verse that's on Tim Shell, like he mayest, Cain, sin is crouching at your door. That's what that whole book is about, is essentially, and its desire is for you, and God saying, like you need to choose. But
Absolutely.
the choice requires discernment. I mean, you have to pick this or that.
Yeah, there was a really, I'd say, powerful article going back to the whole Israel conflict for a second about this. That was this week's Torah reading that was about. It was actually doubling down on remembering that even members of Hamas are made in God's image, and that they're making a choice. They're making a choice between they have a choice between good and evil. That's part of being in God's image in this reading, and they're making a choice. But that's not because they're animals, or because, and it's not. In fact, that would dehumanizing them in this case actually makes it worse in a way. Not in a way that we actually need to fully recognize that this is a human choice. In some ways, that kind of has echoes of Peterson, which to me too, honestly. But yeah, I thought that was an important point. That this and also I don't know the words.
Chad.
Like you just said. Chad, sorry, go ahead, Chad. You know Chad, what? I want Sherry to be able to jump on as well, guys. This is really riveting, as you guys know. But
well, if Sherry's gonna jump on, she needs to take over because I gotta go. So, Chad, what you haven't said anything. Give us a
catch you guys later.
See you.
It's good to see you, Fuzzy. I was thinking.
Love you, Chad. Gavin.
Love you too, brother. Be safe.
Love you, Fuzzy.
Can you guys hear this thing? I can't tell.
We can hear you.
Okay. So I just want to say what I was kind of thinking about and noticing. Regardless of sin itself, I was thinking about the inevitability of progress through time and space, and like the preparation for those things. So like I don't know, it's a matter of pick your poison, sin or don't sin. And and I don't know, somehow I think some of this stuff, like almost everything that we've mentioned, would seem to have been inevitable for reality to play out, or for actuality to play out. And so I wonder, because like I was thinking about when you was talking about the knowledge of fruit of good and evil, and Solomon picking that, and that was like almost like the proper pattern. But he didn't. I don't know what I'm thinking exactly. I got stuff floating around up in my melon, and was wondering what you think of that, and how, like, I don't know, just because I wonder if something like comforts and affluence lead to things like will not lead to it, but it's inevitable that something like war would come about because like maybe that has to do with harvest. I don't know. And just thinking about kind of the inevitability of that, and how a static piece is not an actual option on this plane. So I don't know. I'm probably really heretical and stupid.
No, I think that's great, Chad. The level that you're trying to talk about stuff, I think is really hard to talk about, because I agree. I mean, it's the line between this is like conversations that Cal and I have where we're both like, we're at the limits of our ability to name anything, and it's probably useful to almost anyone listening to it or who would hear it because it's like it's the line between becoming and being, and it's very much like potency and actuality. And like, if I'm very much a believer that this is the best of all possible worlds and that whatever happens is inevitable because it happened. And that's not a weird, it's not some kind of weird determinism because it's outside of this, it's outside of this linear progression of time and causality. It's beyond your scope to even talk about. But at the end of the day, I think what it gets at is like the whole knowledge of good and evil is it's, I don't know, Gavin and I were talking about that earlier. It's just like good, if something is evil, well, it's evil, but it all depends upon your frame at which you're looking at it and analyzing it. Because like you meant it for evil, I meant it for good, and this has a lot of conversations we've had in the Voxer about differences with understanding of evil and bad between Judaism and certain strains of Christianity. And it's real hard to talk about.
Well, here's maybe a way of thinking about it. And this, I apologize, but I have to say it. So, no matter what fruit you chose to eat, shit was gonna happen either way. So,
Agreed. Good word. All right, Yosef, you're muted.
Oh yeah. Otherwise, there'd be no story. Oh yeah.
Yes.
This is the right. Kabbalah has 984 worlds created before ours or whatever. But we know what? There's no stories from any of them. The only one that has a story is ours. And the only way a story happens is if it doesn't stay in stasis. It has to play out. It has to be lived out.
Yeah. The place to live everything. Gavin, Michael, closing words.
Love you guys. Glad to be
Good
here.
ones. Thanks for coming, brother.
It was nice to talk to you guys.
I just want to say, you know, I've been thinking about this thing for a long time, and Cain and Abel is a big one, and the thing with Noah's sons, like that's been used to create a theology of good people and bad people, and I think that's as someone who will say, even this, as maybe a hopeful universalist, if I'm going to be a hopeful universalist, I want to look for a redemptive, you know, aspect of everybody that's, you know, part of God's story. And I think you can very easily see the redemptive arc in the story of Cain. And so I think, you know, that's been probably a secondary and a tertiary issue on many people's plate, but it's a really important one when it comes to how we view others.
I've extended my stuff to Noah's sons too. Don't worry, I can talk about that sometime.
Okay.
Nice.
Everything that God does is to bring us closer to Him. That includes the curses.
Well, and to quote Jason one more time, if forgiveness really is salvation and is the most godlike thing, you know, there had to be things needing to be forgiven. If forgiveness is salvation, that's where I'm kind of am now. Is I think the unforgivable sin is unforgiveness.
well, there is no mercy without sin.
And it gets complicated once you start talking about and once you start talking about Amalek, you have real problems because the Bible there does seem to be some sort of evil that can't be atoned in this world, and that's a big question, right?
Yeah. All right, guys. It was great. Thanks for coming, and
Thank you.
till next time.